So let's talk about distraction, because I think distraction gets a bad rap. It's usually associated with negative things like disruptive behavior or disengagement. But I think education could learn a lot by engaging with distraction and leveraging it in teaching and learning. Now, I want to make a distinction. Distraction is not multitasking. I see multitasking as throwing 10 balls up in the air and hoping they come down in a way that you catch them in one hand. And we know that that doesn't work, even though our systems, our schools, our workplaces are set up in a way that make us try and make that work. Distraction's a little bit different. I see distraction as this really ripe space, this space between where you're at and sort of where you hope to be, where you're going, where you're dreaming about. And so within an educational context, I see distraction as this space between sort of where a learner is and possibility. Now, one of the things about that space is that it's process-oriented, creative, interesting, and that all sounds good, right? But it's also messy. And I think that that's the tension that education has with that idea of distraction. That's why it's so easy to label something as distraction, right? Arts, that's distracting, and so you can kind of throw that out the window. Creativity, that's distracting. You're staring out the window. Go to the office, that's distracting. I think it's so easy because education would like to sort of remain buttoned up in its letter grades and its test scores. And it's a little bit uncomfortable with that messy space, a little bit uncomfortable with transparency and learning. And so I think there's an opportunity there, and I'd like to explore that today. Now, I think about the 21st century workplace, and it's going to ask of its employees to think themselves out of a square box, to be agile, innovative. But I think about 21st century education, big E education, right? Think about that today, and it's asking just the opposite of its students. It's asking its students to stay in that square box, both literally and figuratively, to think in this very linear way, to conform. And so I'd like us to begin to sort of maybe redefine distraction and think about maybe embracing it and managing it and creating it in this very thoughtful and intentional way. Now, when I think about embracing distraction, I think of babies. And I have a baby at home. He's 4 months. And babies at around the 4 to 6 months embark upon a really exciting adventure: table food. And table food, I think about my 4-month-old, and I'm excited for him because it's all of these new flavors, and, well, he's only been drinking milk, so it's new, everything's new to him. But all of these colors and shapes and textures, it's exciting. And they're figuring out how to get it in their mouth and keep it in their mouth, and they're figuring out what they like or what they don't like. But the one thing about that learning experience is it's messy. And so I could sort of, while he's figuring all of this out, it ends up on the floor and all over his clothes and just everywhere. And so I could look at that process and say, well, I don't really like, that makes me uncomfortable. I don't really like that. And so I want you to eat this way, and I'm going to feed you in such a way that it's comfortable for me. I think that's sometimes what education does. Design these learning spaces in a way that's comfortable for education and for the adults and not necessarily for the learners. And so I just realized, you know what? Babies need to have this experience. It's a part of their development. Make a mess. It's just part of the learning. I think about that also with my 7-year-old. Now, he sometimes likes to stand up when he studies. And for a long time, I was like, I don't really get that. Why are you standing? And so he'd be doing his spelling words. I'm like, don't you want to sit down? And why are you standing up? He's like, Mom, just, I got this. And he wasn't doing anything wrong. It wasn't bothering anyone. But I don't know, why did I want him to sit down? Why did I want to sort of control the way that he was studying? It kind of didn't make sense. And so you know what I learned to do? I learned to sort of get out of the way. It's kind of like getting out of the way of the baby food, too. Like, you just got to get out of the way. Let them sort of get in it. And my 7-year-old, I just got out of the way. He's a great student. I'm not worried about it. He wasn't worried about it. Just sort of embracing the way that learners learn. And that's okay. And so once we sort of wrap our head around the idea of embracing the way that learners learn, we can sort of move on to this idea of, like, now how do you manage that? How do you manage the mess? And I think about my 3-year-old. Now, all my boys are in a Montessori school, and so I love that Ina was talking about Reggio, because there's some similar philosophies. But in a Montessori school, he's in preschool, and there's this room full of 3 to 6-year-olds. And all the materials, the learning materials, geography and language arts and math, the sciences, they're all in these amazing sort of multi-sensory works. And they're all down within reach for these 3 to 6-year-olds to choose and choose their direction in learning. And they have these focused times where they're working, and one would think that that would be a chaotic classroom, and that these 3 to 6-year-olds would just have everything all over the place. And it's busy, but it's intentionally busy. And it's messy, but it's intentionally messy. And these young people are learning how to move quite beautifully and quite naturally around, in, and through these subject matters that they're studying. Another thing I find really amazing in his classroom is that they keep food in the classroom, morning and afternoon, much to the dismay of my husband and I, because we're constantly trying to have food for them. But I think it really serves a good purpose in the classroom, because not only are these students learning to manage their time and their learning space, but they're also managing how they sustain themselves in that space. And so they can go get food, and one might think that the 3 to 6-year-olds spend all their time with the food, but they don't. They actually know, they get it, that I don't eat at the same time you eat. I'm gonna eat when I'm hungry. I'm gonna go back to my work. And it's this beautiful dance between the food and that learning space. And one thing I also find really fascinating is the fact that the food now activates 2 additional senses they wouldn't have in the classroom normally. And so what happens when all 5 senses are engaged in that learning environment? I think it's really interesting. So we're getting through the embracing. Maybe we're buying the fact that, okay, distraction's not all so bad, and maybe we can manage it, and it is a little bit different from multitasking. Now, how do we begin to create it? What do we do with that? And I would say it begins with a mindset. Now, I work at the Wexner Center for the Arts, and I created a program called Pages, and it's a literacy, arts, and writing program. And one of the things about Pages is it's very multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. It's a huge partnership, and we work with artists and educators and students and the community, and we realize that the schools can't do this on their own, and so we're in the schools, and the schools come to the Arts Center, and it's this sort of back and forth exchange. It's a really beautiful partnership. And in thinking about creating this idea of distraction, I was reminded what that looks like, what learning looks like. Morning of a Pages field trip, and there was a class that was late. And the moment they walked into the door, I could sense something was wrong. And it was really wrong. They had found out that one of the students had passed away earlier that morning, on the bus ride over. And so imagine they're coming into this art space, and we've got this whole day planned, writing and working with an artist and going into the galleries and watching video, and here it was, they're grieving. And it was shock, actually, because they had just found out. And so I told the teacher I wanted to give them out, and I wanted to say, you can go back to school, do whatever you need to do. I support whatever you need to do. And you know what he said to me? He said, no, we need to be here. And so I thought, okay, I support that, whatever you need, because we're going to go back to the classroom and suffocate. So I watched them the rest of the day, and I watched them engaged in their writing and working with the artists and working with students from different parts of the community. And there were moments, sure, there were tears. I would see a student writing, and there were tears. I saw students comforting each other. But the thing I learned about that grief was it wasn't an excuse to sort of disengage. That grief became a part of the learning. And so it became this really beautiful distraction instead of the grief is over here, it's distracting, they can't learn. The grief became a part of the learning, and it was amazing to see that. And so what I realized is it is the mindset. And so that mindset can shift into the space, and that space, really that sort of engaged distraction is learning. And if I can reference John Dewey, that learning is experience. And that experience opens up a pathway to possibility. Thank you.